Given Nigerians' current economic challenges worsened by declining global oil prices, the federal government is seeking to enforce tax payment as a means of raising funds to finance its developmental efforts. But in the words of a former president of the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, Adebimpe Balogun says the present tax system and tax laws are obsolete.
The rate is not going to solve a problem. What they should do is to go after those who are not paying, as at now. And also to demonstrate goodwill and the political will to do that is to have our legislators, our executives demonstrating the payment of taxes on not just the official salary, basic, but on their allowances as well. They need to demonstrate that. So we need to continually review our tax laws to ensure that we have taken care of all the ambiguities, all the loopholes in the laws.
On the matter of tax payments through electronic platforms, Deremi Atunda, an information technology expert, says e-payment is a lot easier and more transparent. But he is unhappy about the lack of legislative power to drive the e-payment system.
Very clear that e-payment is the immediate, not even the future anymore. Then we should have laws that speak to it today. And that's why we're having challenges. Some of our old laws still require that you present paper evidence for payment. And you can imagine somebody has made, just look at a typical example. You are the hospital, you've made payments using your debit or credit card, and somebody expects a manually written receipt because that's what the existing law says. The world has moved beyond that.
Coordinator of the Wale Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, Moturayo Alaka, also spoke on the Nigerian tax system.
We have to talk about it within a social framework. We have to have some strategy behind it. We have to understand that we are 180 million people, mostly jobless people. We have to understand that if we would tax, we have to have a strategy behind it. So we thought to stimulate a debate around taxation from all stakeholders.
The conclusion reached at the 8th Wale Soyinka Center media lecture was that the Nigerian government must explore different revenue sources to stimulate economic development in the country. Sharon Ijason, TVC News, Lagos.
With us in the studio is a tax partner, Eben F. Jules. Many thanks for joining us on TVC Breakfast this morning. And I think we'll also have with us via Skype a tax expert, Siri Agbe. Do we have him? Okay, we'll try and connect with him. And
yeah,
okay.
He's on.
All right.
Siri Agbe, thanks for joining us on TVC Breakfast. Oh, all right, let's start in the studio with Eben Jules here. When it comes to taxes, we know that there are complex issues relating to taxes generally, but I'd like to start from the window where there are disagreements sometimes between when a tax officer comes and says you're supposed to pay this or you're owing us this, and the taxpayer says, no, that's not how much I'm owing and all of that. When it comes to understanding how much tax anybody is supposed to pay at whatever time, there seems to be a gap there between what Nigerians know they're entitled to paying and what the authorities feel that they are supposed to pay. Why do we have that discrepancy?
The gap would always be there because taxation is, as you know, is a profession everywhere in the world. You need experts sometimes to throw more light on areas that are not as clear as they should be to everybody. But that notwithstanding, in Nigeria, as a developing country, you will find out that the taxpayer everywhere has rights. And most times, the taxpayer has rights. The taxpayer knows he has rights when he's allowed to vote. We've only just started voting in this country continuously for the past 17 years. And our awareness of our rights as taxpayers is on the increase. And as such, we're able to stand up to the taxman. Before now, we'll typically cross our legs and try to negotiate with the taxman. But when you know you have rights.
What are the rights?
Your right is the tax is imposed by law. And so even the taxman does not have a right to tax you beyond what the law says. So it's important that you understand what the law says. How much power does the tax authority have over me? Does the tax authority have the power to just come seal up my business premises without a warrant? How much power does the the tax authority have over my business? So you as
before a company, for instance, is sealed up, there must be a court warrant. Right?
There should be a warrant. There should be a warrant. You have a situation where, with all due respect to some tax authorities, they adopt bully tactics. You have a tax authority who says because you got a contract from my state, for example, even though you don't have an employee in my state, but you got a contract from a company in my state, I hereby impose on you tax. And then I open up a conflict where there should ordinarily be no conflict. And then because I have the apparatus of the state, I bring my people and then I seal up your premises, But where taxpayers are aware of their rights, they are able to stand up to the taxman.
All right, let's bring in Esiri here. Esiri Agbe joining us on Skype. Now, Esiri, we really need to understand the standpoint of knowing how much tax to pay. So many people sometimes are confused where they don't know how much money they're supposed to pay, how much tax they're supposed to pay at a certain time. Why do we have that discrepancy? Is the question I was asking in the studio earlier on. Can you give us another perspective to understanding where Nigerians don't know how much they're supposed to pay at what time, sometimes?
I'm sorry, I get the question wrong. I didn't hear you.
All right, Esiri, can you hear me now? All right, yes. I'm asking, there's a question I asked in the studio as a foundational question to understanding why many Nigerians, in most cases, have disagreements with the taxman as to how much to pay. Isn't there supposed to be a stipulated amount that everybody knows how much you're supposed to pay? So when you're contravening, you know how much you're owing, as the case may be.
Yeah, that's true. So there are tax laws, and it has been guided to those tax laws, and being coming up to speed with them. And in the absence of even knowing them yourself directly, there are tax consultants like myself that can help. So the tax rates are specified in these laws, and once you have a good understanding of them, it then gives you a better standing or a better ground for disputing any position with the tax authority to the extent it varied from what was in the law.
All right, let's talk about overlap of taxation among the three tiers of government in Nigeria, where the federal government gets some, the state is entitled to some, and of course the local government. Where do we draw the line? This question. Yes, please.
Country structured now, we have three tiers of government, and each of these tiers have power at certain levels to either assess and collect the taxes, or in some instances, like you would find personal income tax, it's a federal legislation, but then the collection for those taxes, it's the responsibility of the state to do so. In terms of where we draw the line, I think it's really just having a backbone structure that kind of guides how often we would legislate on taxes and how many taxes we should have pretty much at all of those levels. And when we add all of them up together, it doesn't then become an additional or an excessive burden for the taxpayers. And so I think that's the one strategy that we need to be the guiding backbone for all of them. And I think we sort of have that guidance provided to us in the National Tax Policy, which was a document that had been prepared some years ago in 2004. It's not something that's pretty much followed when taxes are being legislated in the country, but it would do us good if we follow that one strategy so that there's some sort of consistency, or suffice to say coordination in the way we collect and assess those taxes.
Okay, Iben, let me come to you on this. I remember that when it comes to the issues of taxation, government is government. We know that there are three tiers of government, as the case may be, but in the three tiers of government, there's when it comes to collecting taxes, you're collecting taxes back into the system. But the three tiers of government seem to be working at cross purposes sometimes. When the federal government has its taxes to collect from an agency or from a business, the state also comes, the local government also comes, and all of that. Doesn't that amount to multiple taxation, like Busalam was putting it earlier?
Yes, for me, I will see multiple taxation as a situation where the same stream of income is taxed several times by several tiers of government. There is some form of clarity in Nigeria based on our system of government. Corporate entities, fully incorporated individuals, pay their taxes to the federal government. They pay their income taxes to the federal government. Individuals pay their taxes to the states in which they are residents. However, employed people who are individuals, their taxes are deducted at source by their employers and remitted on their behalf to the states. Now, where you have real issues, issues on some kind of transaction taxes, such as say VAT, for example, if you have states imposing additional sales tax, and then you have to charge VAT, which is payable to the federal government, then you start having the same stream of income taxed twice, and that becomes a very big problem, especially in states where that is happening right now. Then you have the local government system, which is where their taxes are not as clear-cut. You have multiple levies, and their manner of enforcement can be quite, would you say, rigid and crude. You know, and I think this problem is been there all along. That's why in 1996, I think, the government came up with a law that says approved levies and taxes law, and listed all the taxes that are collectible in Nigeria. What I don't know is how often that law has been updated. However, the more and the real issue is that since the current democratic era, successive national assemblies has continued to levy additional taxes on business. Additional taxes. So you start with the first level of tax, which is your 30% income tax rate on your corporate tax. And then you have 2% education tax, which is supposed to be separate. And then if you're a bank or you use a lot of IT equipment, then you have another 1% IT tax. And then you sit down, and then somebody else comes with it brings back a body that is supposed to be dead, NSITF, which was supposed to be replaced with the Pension Reform Act, was supposed to scrap the NSITF. Okay. You bring it back, and then you impose an additional 2% payroll taxes on, on companies. And then you bring back other laws. So for every law that is being passed, the funding mechanism, additional...
This segment, we're talking about the issues of multiple taxation and some of the challenges generally. And we have a tax partner, Eben Joels, with us in the studio, and as well Esiri Agbe with us on Skype, on phone generally. Now, let me come to you, Esiri. If we have to see things from the window of the tax collector, or the tax official, or the tax partner, or the taxman, as the case may be, what are the kind of everyday challenges that are inherent in collecting and putting tax together in the modern day we find ourselves now?
I think the biggest challenge they would have, which also reflects in the level of taxes we expect as a nation, the inability to get on the informal sector and use that to generate or to collect taxes, as the case may be. When we look at some of the figures around taxes collected to date and the number of taxes that we have as a nation, one would then wonder, whether or not there are things that we could do better in harnessing, for example, technology, and using that to our advantage in increasing tax collection. So year on year, the total number that may be collected in taxes at the federal level may increase, and that's perhaps a function of additional payments from people. but there is more that can be done in expanding the tax base. And I think expanding that tax base is the biggest challenge that they would have, or the tax collectors will have. Of the numbers we have regarding doing business in Nigeria, for example, relies on paying of taxes as a sole indicator.
All right, Esiri. All right, Esiri, we seem to have distortions on your audio. We can't hear you clearly, but let's see if we can clear that up and clean it up, and then we can hear. But let's move on now. There are some other information. Now, Nigeria is ranked 125th in the world out of 183 economies by the latest ranking of the World Bank. Now, a major parameter for this assessment is using the incidences of regulatory controls and taxation of business activity to determine the ease of doing business. So we ask, how easy is it to do business in Nigeria? Let me throw that question to Eben first. If a new business is coming up, you just want to go maybe register with the corporate affairs, for instance, to start. How easy is that when it comes to at the level of what point taxes comes in and all of that?
Well, the ranking reflects the reality.
So tell us the realities on ground
of doing business in Nigeria. The first hurdle is the fact that in some other countries, you could have what is called shelf companies. So an investor coming into Nigeria for the first time, for example, in some other clime, not Nigeria, would on day one just buy a company off the shelf and then change the papers. Now here, if you want to incorporate a company, it will typically take you, say, 2 weeks, if you are lucky. If you have a fast lawyer, you know, and then you get, say, 2 weeks. Even if you want to go the express route, which they have, maybe it takes you a week if you go the express route. That is to incorporate the business. Now you need to then go ahead and register for taxes immediately upon your incorporation. You register with the tax authorities and then you get your tax identification number, among other things. Now in Nigeria also you have a lot of things that are tied to producing certain certificates. One of them will be the company's tax clearance certificate. And so you get a new company needing a tax clearance certificate. You know, and then you're wondering, and then you have to get it. So you actually go to the tax office and then you get a tax clearance certificate that says
are you
nil.
going to pay some, how do you get that?
Well, those are part of, you're not supposed to pay anything. The tax authority is supposed to give it to you for free. But you know how business is in Nigeria. You know how things
those are the
work in
realities we
Nigeria.
want to hear from you. You are on ground, so you know the reality. So give us the reality. Let's know
the
what
fact
really
is
happens.
we need more transparency in the regulator. You know, I tell people that it's not a small lesson from scripture when they say he who had no sin should cast the first stone, or rather, you have no right to judge others when your hand is not clean.
He that comes to equity must come with clean hands.
Sorry, you know, so the regulators, whether it's the tax authority, whether it's the custom in particular, which is even completely opaque. The fact is, the revenue authorities are, you know, the Federal Inland Revenue Authority are more transparent than most other agencies that we have.
We have more information to read about. Just before then, just
so
quickly touch on.
we need more transparency.
Yeah, quickly touch on the issue of tax holidays. Tax holidays for companies that are just springing up, or tax holidays for the medium scale kind of businesses that we have in Nigeria, if they're just springing up.
Yes.
How will you survive? Can the country survive without them paying taxes, say, for the first few years?
The country has survived. And to be honest with you, some of us were almost hounded out of business because we spoke against certain things. I will explain to you. We have the Industrial Development Act, which is, you know, a subsidiary legislation of the Companies Income Tax Act that says, okay, if certain companies will be exempt from taxes and granted pioneer status, that is, if they are engaged in certain industries. And the exemption they were talking about were clearly tied to companies' income tax. Now, in the last government, some folks who were paying petroleum profit tax, which has no business with corporate income tax, okay, which had no business with corporate income tax, They were paying petroleum profit tax. Okay, approached the NIPC, Nigeria Investment Promotion Council, which was the agency granting the pioneer legislation. And they got tax exemptions. Tax exemptions which by law should be for companies paying companies income tax. Okay, and when some of us raised an eyebrow, we're almost hounded out of business because we're the minority voice. The country has survived. There's nothing wrong with tax exemptions. However, tax exemptions should be applied based on the law.
All right.
Okay.
To stimulate investments.
Okay. All right, if we move ahead, Nigeria practices fiscal federalism, in which the fiscal responsibility of government is based on a three-tiered tax structure divided between the federal, state, and local government. We talked about earlier on, certainly. And that's for us to have a better understanding of where taxes go to, the three tiers of government.
Okay, well, the three of them enjoy some measure of autonomy when it comes to taxation. They have constitutionally empowered rights to tax individuals and corporate entities operating within their jurisdiction. And these have created myriad of complexities for corporate entities as they are faced with several demands to pay tax from all corners. I think our guest actually covered that. So let's move on. The Federal Inland Revenue Board is saddled with the responsibility of managing companies' income tax, petroleum profit tax, value-added tax, capital gains tax, and also the implementation of the tax laws and issuing of guidelines in realization of the provisions of its enabling act.
Now, states also have their boards of internal revenue services as their operational arm. Now, they have the responsibility of administering the taxes within the purview of the prescribed powers of the state government, so local government areas. That our guest talked about that earlier on. Now, this therefore raises the question: what are the taxing rights of each of these tiers of government on the incomes of taxpayers? What are the limits to which these governments can exercise their legitimate right to levy a charge on the operations of corporate entities operating within their jurisdictional authority? Now, let me come to, as we try to get a Siri. Okay, Siri, let me come to you on this now. We often don't hear so much cases of tax-related cases in court, or maybe they don't make it to the media, as the case may be. If a business, for instance, a businessman who is not very comfortable with the way taxes are imposed on him, what right does he have to go to the court to sue the tax authority?
So there are rights for the taxpayer, and there are different levels of court that he can approach. From the first time when you receive the notice, you have about 30 days to do an objection, and then you go back and forth disputing with the tax authorities. To the extent they don't agree, then there's a notice of refusal to amend. And if you refuse to then amend the notice, you as the taxpayer have a right to go to the first level of court of appeal, and that's the tax appeal tribunal. So you get to the tax appeal tribunal, and then you go up the chain. To the extent you don't get any recompense at that level, you go to the federal high court, to the court of appeal, and then if it makes its way to the Supreme Court, all well and good. But I think over time, what has discouraged taxpayers is the timeliness within which those disputes are resolved. And so over time, it has taken a rather long period to get resolutions at the court levels. In the past, we used to have an average of 10 years to get a resolution. But I think in the past couple of years, we've seen some progress, at least at the tax appeal tribunal, where we've had more cases decided at that level.
Okay, Esiri. All right, Esiri, thank you very much for talking to us on TVC Breakfast. Certainly, time will not permit us to dwell more on this, but however, we thank you. There'll be more time for us to dwell on this. Iben Joel, thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.